The billion-dollar merger was one signature away. But Adrian Sterling's world wasn't shattered by a market crash. It was shattered by a child's cry. On his screen, the board of directors watched as his son, Max, collapsed in a fit of panic. Tears. Adrian, the man who commanded empires, froze. He had no protocol for this, no strategy for a broken heart. Then she appeared. Clara, the nanny. Without a word, she knelt, her calm voice a shield against the chaos. The men on the screen saw a problem being solved. But Adrian saw something far more dangerous, a quiet power he couldn't control. And he was about to make a decision that would force this unassuming woman into his world, sparking a war he never saw coming. They say Adrian Sterling was a king in his kingdom of glass and steel. Everything in his world was arranged in perfect order, from his billion-dollar deals to the crease in his shirt. But that evening, an unforeseen variable appeared. And that variable was sitting on the living room floor, assembling a cardboard pirate ship with his son. "You," Adrian's voice cut through the air, as cold as the glass of the skyscraper that bore his name. Clara looked up, one hand still holding the paper mast. "Mr. Sterling? Is something wrong with Max?" He stood in the doorway, his posture rigid, his face an emotionless mask. "Not about Max, about tonight. You're coming with me to the corporate appreciation gala." Clara blinked, nearly dropping the ship. I don't understand. "I'm Max's caregiver." "Not tonight," Adrian replied curtly, as if closing a negotiation. "My +1 had an emergency. I need a replacement. You are here. The problem is solved." The condescension in his tone ignited a small fire within Clara. She stood up, dusting off her jeans. "Sir, that is not in my contract. I am not a backup for your social events." Adrian raised a single eyebrow, a rare sign of surprise. "Then we'll amend the contract. A stylist will be here in 20 minutes. A generous bonus will be in your account by morning. Be ready at 8. He turned on his heel, considering the matter closed. Clara took a deep breath. He thought he could control everything with money. Perhaps he was right. But if she had to step into his world tonight, she wouldn't do it as a pawn. She would do it as herself. At precisely 8 p.m., Clara descended the staircase. Adrian was waiting in the main hall, adjusting a gold cufflink. When he looked up, his movements froze. The woman before him was no longer the simple nanny. In an emerald silk dress that hugged her elegant frame, her hair swept up in a sophisticated knot that exposed her graceful neck, Clara radiated a quiet, magnetic beauty. No lavish jewelry, no heavy makeup, just pure elegance. Adrian swallowed hard. "You look acceptable," he managed, trying to mask his astonishment. Clara offered a small, knowing smile. "Good enough for someone who wasn't part of the plan, I hope." He ignored her jab and held out his arm. "Let's go." The grand ballroom of the Monarch Hotel glittered under crystal chandeliers. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and calculated conversations. When Adrian entered with Clara, a brief, silent wave spread through the room. All eyes turned to the beautiful, unknown woman beside the famously cold CEO. The first to approach them was Veronica Croft, Adrian's ex-fiancée and heiress to a banking empire. Her smile was perfectly polished, but her eyes were sharp as knives. "Adrian, darling," Veronica purred, her sweetness artificial. "What a surprise. I didn't take you for someone interested in diversifying your social partners." Her gaze swept over Clara with disdain. Before Adrian could respond, Clara took a step forward, extending her hand. "Hello, Miss Croft. I'm Clara. It's a pleasure to meet you." Her voice was calm and steady. Veronica barely touched Clara's fingertips. "Really? How fascinating. Which department are you in at Sterling Industries?" "I work in the most critical department." Clara smiled graciously. The one that ensures the future of the corporation grows up healthy and happy. Veronica frowned, missing the subtext. Adrian looked at Clara, a spark in his eyes. The answer was brilliant, discreet, and elevated her role without being defensive. She hadn't just handled Veronica. She had neutralized her. That night, Clara was more than Adrian's date. She spoke with a German investor about philosophy, debated storytelling with a marketing director, and did it all with a confidence that came from within, not from the dress she was wearing. On the way home, the tension in the car was gone. Adrian broke the silence. "You surprised me," he admitted. "I was just being myself," Clara replied, watching the city lights stream by. Adrian parked in front of the mansion. He didn't rush out of the car. He turned to her, his gaze no longer cold but calculating. "Tonight's performance was beneficial for my image," he said bluntly. "I have a business proposition for you, not an order." A proposition. Clara looked at him, waiting. "Over the next 2 months, there are many important events. I want you to continue in this role. A clear contract, a very high compensation." He was offering to hire her as a girlfriend. The thought was absurd, but Clara didn't laugh. She looked into the powerful CEO's eyes and realized, for the first time, she held something he needed. And that changed everything. Adrian expected hesitation, perhaps an attempt to negotiate for more money. That was how his world worked. But Clara didn't do that. She looked him straight in the eye, her calmness a quiet weapon. "I have 3 conditions," she said, her voice clear. "First, all matters concerning Max, his schedule, education, and well-being are my sole discretion. You will not interfere. Second, my wardrobe, my choice. No more surprise stylists. And third," she paused, "when we are not in public, we are merely employer and employee, nothing more." Adrian felt a wave of annoyance. She was dictating terms to him, but mixed with the annoyance was an uninvited flicker of respect. She couldn't be bought. "Agreed," he nodded. "The contract begins tomorrow." Their charade was flawless. At charity auctions and business dinners, Clara was a captivating presence. She was intelligent, witty, and never tried to be someone she wasn't. But her true impact wasn't under the spotlights. It was in the quiet of the cold mansion. Max, the boy who had always lived in his own inner world, began to change. He used to draw pictures and then hide them, as if his dreams were a shameful secret. One evening, Adrian came home late. He heard no TV, no noise. He walked into the living room and stopped. The entire room had been transformed into a universe. Max's drawings were taped everywhere. Planets made of crayon, spaceships made of paper. And in the middle of this universe, Clara was sitting with Max. She was using a small flashlight, shining in on each drawing and telling a story. ... And then the brave Captain Max landed on the gummy bear planet. Clara whispered, her voice magical. But the bubblegum monster blocked his path. Max laughed, a clear, genuine laugh. A sound Adrian hadn't heard in a very long time. He stood in the shadows, for the first time feeling like an outsider in his own home. Clara wasn't just caring for his son. She was resurrecting his world. It was a powerful, emotional hook, lodging deep in Adrian's frozen heart. Another hook came from the last place he expected, his work. Adrian was struggling with a new community initiative for his corporation, an effort to improve Sterling's image. The reports from his team were full of empty jargon and soulless figures. Frustrated, he threw the thick binder on his private study desk and left. The next morning, he found it still there. But on the cover was a small, sticky note. Clara's handwriting. "People don't need a savior descending from on high, Mr. Sterling. They just need someone to listen and hand them the tools to save themselves." Anger flared. How dare she interfere? But then the words seared into his mind. Simple, direct, and devastatingly accurate. It pinpointed the core flaw his top-tier marketing team had missed. He stared at the note. This woman, whom he had seen only as a temporary solution, had more insight than the experts he paid a fortune. The chance to prove it came sooner than he thought. The meeting with the board of the Northgate Foundation, a group of conservative and discerning philanthropists, was set to decide the fate of Sterling's entire community project. But an hour before the meeting, Adrian's project director was rushed to the hospital with food poisoning. Everything was falling apart. "Cancel the meeting," Adrian ordered into his phone, his anger boiling. "You can't," a voice said from behind him. It was Clara, holding a cup of tea. "Canceling now proves you aren't serious." "What do you expect me to do?" he snapped. "Present a project I know is flawed myself?" "No," she said, setting the tea on the table. "Let me." Adrian laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "You?" "Clara, this is a multi-million-dollar strategy meeting, not a PTA conference." Clara's gaze didn't waver. "And your multi-million-dollar strategy is about to fail because it doesn't understand people." "I do. Give me 30 minutes. Desperate, Adrian agreed. He had no other choice. Clara walked into the boardroom, where the air was thick with skepticism. She pushed aside the slide deck full of complex charts that Adrian's assistant had prepared. She stood before the board, armed only with her sincerity. She didn't start with numbers. She started with a story about a small library in the neighborhood where she grew up, about how one book could change a child's life. She didn't talk about philanthropy or corporate social responsibility. She talked about building ladders, not rescue ropes. She turned abstract concepts into vivid, emotional, and practical images. The board members, used to slick corporate presentations, began to truly listen. They leaned forward, captivated by her story. Adrian stood at the back of the room, witnessing the impossible. She wasn't just presenting a project. She was inspiring a movement. She was connecting. When she finished, there was a moment of silence. And then the foundation's chairman, a notoriously tough man, spoke. "Young lady," he said, "your plan is very different from what we expected. It's bolder, more human. We're not just approving the budget. We want to double it." The room erupted in agreement. Adrian stood motionless. This woman hadn't just saved a meeting. She had shown him a completely new definition of power. Their charade might be fake, but her impact and the feelings stirring within him were terrifyingly real. Clara's success with the Sterling Foundation became the talk of the town. She was no longer a shadow beside Adrian. She was a rising force, and that, for Veronica Croft, was unacceptable. Her jealousy was no longer about petty jabs. It had evolved into a calculated strategy. Her opportunity came in the form of an intimate dinner at the Croft estate. This was no ordinary social event. The guest of honor was Veronica's father, Harrison Croft, a powerful tycoon whose support Adrian desperately needed to finalize the merger of the century, the Apex project, which would redefine the entire legacy of Sterling Industries. When Adrian accepted the invitation, he felt a vague sense of unease, but refusal was impossible. "Tonight will be important," he told Clara in the car. "Just be careful with Veronica." "I'm always careful," she replied, but she too felt an unusual tension in the air. Contrary to Clara's expectations, Veronica was incredibly friendly. She greeted them with a radiant smile, took Clara's hand, and led her to be introduced to her father. "Father, this is Clara," Veronica said, her voice full of admiration. "She is the brilliant mind behind the groundbreaking changes at the Sterling Foundation. Adrian is so lucky to have such a sharp partner." Mr. Croft, a man with silver hair and the shrewd eyes of an old wolf, looked Clara over with an appraising gaze. "So this is the woman who has the city buzzing. A pleasure to meet you." The Dinner proceeded in a seemingly amicable atmosphere. Veronica continually praised Clara, recounting her success with the Northgate Foundation, making Clara the center of attention. Adrian began to relax, thinking perhaps he had been too suspicious. That was when the trap was sprung. As dessert was served, Mr. Croft set down his fork and looked directly at Adrian. "Sterling," he said, his voice low and powerful. "The Apex merger is a huge gamble. I need reliable partners, men with solid judgment. And I've always believed that a man's choice in a life partner says everything about his character." The air in the room suddenly went still. Clara felt her heart skip a beat. Mr. Croft continued, his eyes locked on Adrian. "This woman," he gestured toward Clara, "is impressive. But I need to know if she's part of your long-term future. So give me your word, Adrian. Is she the woman you will build an empire with, or is she a temporary arrangement, a clever solution? For your image? I don't do business with men who have unsteady hearts." There was the cool twist. It wasn't an insult. It was a fatal test. Adrian was completely cornered. Every escape route was blocked. If he said, "Yes, Clara is my future," he would be lying to one of the most powerful men in the business world. A lie that Veronica, with a triumphant smirk already forming, surely had evidence to expose. The Apex deal would evaporate. If he said, "No, this is an arrangement," he would single-handedly confirm his own unsteadiness, lose Mr. Croft's respect, and, more importantly, destroy Clara in front of everyone, reducing her to a joke, a hired commodity. Clara watched him, holding her breath. She wasn't waiting for him to defend her from an insult. She was waiting to see what he would choose to save, her dignity or his empire. Time stretched into an eternity. Adrian opened his mouth, then closed it. A bead of sweat formed on his brow. He searched for a neutral answer, an escape. "Mr. Croft, I believe that business and my personal life." But it was too late. His hesitation was the answer. A victorious smile flashed across Veronica's lips. Mr. Croft nodded slowly, his expression cold. "I see." Clara felt a sharp, icy pain pierce her heart, but her face remained impossibly calm. She gently placed her napkin on the table. She stood up, her posture radiating a quiet, devastating dignity. "Thank you for the evening, Mr. Croft, Veronica," she said, her voice clear and without a single tremor. "It was a most memorable evening." Then she turned to Adrian, who was still frozen in his chair. "Adrian," she said, and her use of his first name made him flinch. "I believe I have fulfilled my contractual obligations for tonight." The word contractual was delivered like a final, fatal stab. And then she turned and walked out of the room with a poise no one there could match, leaving Adrian alone in the wreckage of a choice he couldn't make. He had chosen nothing, and in doing so, he had lost everything. The dinner party at the Croft estate ended in awkward silence. Harrison Croft said nothing more about the Apex deal. He didn't have to. Adrian's silence had said it all. But in Adrian's mind, the failed business deal was now just a dull noise. The only sound that echoed was the sound of Clara's dignified footsteps as she left the room, and her final two words, contractual obligations, which were now nailed to his conscience. He returned to the empty mansion, its silence now menacing. He went to pour a drink, but his trembling hand sent the crystal glass crashing against the wall. It shattered, just like the self-control he'd always been so proud of. It was a trap, he told himself, pacing the room. There was no right move. He tried to use logic to justify his cowardice. It was a calculated play by Veronica, a test. By Croft. He had been set up. But logic couldn't soothe the image of Clara's face in that moment. Not anger, not hurt, but a deep, quiet disappointment. She hadn't looked at him like an enemy, but like a stranger. He realized his first mistake. He had calculated. In that decisive moment, he had weighed the options like a business deal, when all she needed was a human being. He went upstairs to Clara's room. The door was unlocked. The room was neat, impersonal. Her suitcase was gone. She hadn't left a single angry or accusatory note. On the desk, there was only one thing: the fake girlfriend contract they had signed. A single clean red line was drawn through it, decisive and cold. She had ended it exactly as it had begun, as a transaction. A sense of loss hit him, powerful and unexpected. This wasn't just an employee's departure. This was an emptiness in a place he didn't even know had been filled. The next few days passed in a fog. Adrian tried to focus on work, but his mind kept returning to one question: where had she gone? In a desperate attempt to find a clue, he had his HR department send him Clara's original application file. He sifted through the standard papers resume. REF-EONC, East looking for a next of kin address. An emergency contact dot, and then he found it. Tucked between the neatly printed 4 pages was a thin, worn folder, apparently submitted by mistake. The cover read, in handwritten script, Project Nightingale, Models for Sustainable Community Revitalization. Curious, he opened it. Inside wasn't a list of qualifications. It was a soul. Hand-drawn charts detailing job training programs for women, fundraising plans for a children's library, heartfelt notes on building green spaces in forgotten urban areas. The documents were dated years ago, long before she ever set foot in his world. There it was, the climax of truth. Every piece fell into place. Her insight on the foundation, her ability to inspire the Northgate board, her understanding of people. None of it was luck or a sudden talent. It was the result of years of quiet passion and research, and that's when he realized his second, much greater mistake. He hadn't failed to protect her. He had failed to see her. From the very beginning, he had valued her based on what she could do for him: a date for a gala, a fake girlfriend, a solution for his project. He had acted no differently than Harrison Croft, always asking, "What is your value?" instead of, "Who are you?" He had used the very same transactional coldness he despised in others on the one woman who had seen the real person inside him. The torment now morphed into a deep, profound shame. On a page within the Nightingale folder was an address. It wasn't a private home, but a community center in a part of the city Adrian had never been to. Driven by an impulse stronger than reason, he drove there. The place was entirely different from his world. The buildings weren't skyscrapers, but they were vibrant with life. The sound of children's laughter, the smell of fresh bread, walls adorned with artistic graffiti. He found the center, a small building painted bright blue with a wooden sign. That read, the Nightingale Hub. An older woman with kind eyes and graying hair greeted him at the door. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for Clara," Adrian said, his voice hesitant. The woman's eyes lit up. "Our Clara? I'm an old acquaintance." For the next hour, Adrian just listened. He heard stories of how Clara had raised every penny to fix the center's leaking roof, how she stayed up all night tutoring kids before their exams, how she organized community potlucks so no one in the neighborhood went to bed hungry. A plumber told him, "She never just gave us money. She taught us a trade, then found us our first clients. She gave us dignity." Sitting there, among the ordinary people Clara had poured her heart into, Adrian finally understood his core mistake. He had tried to fix everything with money and power, while she built people with sincerity and trust. His world measured success by what you owned. Her world celebrated you for what you gave. He left the center as evening fell. The torment was gone, replaced by a painful clarity. The issue was no longer how to get her back. The issue was how to become a man worthy of her memory. And he knew that journey would be much longer than the drive he had just made. Adrian returned from the Nightingale hub, a different man. The shame had washed away his arrogance, leaving behind only a clear purpose. He was no longer thinking about how to fix his mistake. He was thinking about how to honor the person he had finally seen. He worked through the night, not on sterling deals, but using Clara's Project Nightingale folder as his guide. He drafted a detailed plan to create an entirely new branch of his corporation, an independent social impact fund with a massive endowment and absolute autonomy. He knew an apology would never be enough. He had to offer her a platform worthy of her vision. He prepared himself for a long battle to convince her, to earn back even a sliver of trust. But the world sometimes works in ways no one can predict. The next morning, as he stared at his unfinished plan, his phone rang. It was Daniel Chun, one of the key investors from the fateful dinner at the Croft estate. Adrian braced himself for an awkward call, perhaps a withdrawal of support. "Sterling." Mr. Chun's voice came through, sharp and full of energy. "I've been thinking a lot about that dinner." "Mr. Chun, Adrian began, but Mr. Chun cut him off. "Don't. I'm not calling about Croft or the Apex deal. In fact, I've pulled out of that deal. I don't like the old man's methods." Adrian was stunned. "I'm calling about Miss Clara," Mr. Chun continued. "I saw the whole thing. And while Croft saw your hesitation as weakness, I saw something else. I saw a tug-of-war between two worlds. And I saw that woman's dignity as she walked away. Her vision of ladders, not ropes. That's the future, Sterling." There it was, the unexpected plot twist. A door had closed, but a much larger one was swinging open. "I have a proposition, Mr. Chun said, his voice brimming with excitement. "I want to create an independent social impact investment fund, a brand new entity. I will be the lead investor. You and Sterling Industries can be a founding partner, but it needs a leader with vision and absolute integrity." He paused, letting his words sink in. "It needs a convince Miss Clara to come on as CEO of this fund, and I'll put in $500 million in seed capital. This isn't a branch of Sterling. This is her own empire. Can you do it?" Adrian put down the phone, his hand still trembling. He looked at the plan he had drafted. It seemed so small, so insignificant compared to what had just happened. The world hadn't just rejected the cruelty Clara had faced. The world had responded by betting on her dot. He found Clara after 2 days of searching. She was staying in a small rented apartment with her younger sister, looking anything but broken. On the contrary, she looked focused, surrounded by sketches of new ideas, plans for small-scale community projects. She was starting over on her own terms. When she saw Adrian at her door, she wasn't surprised, just coolly wary. He didn't beat around the bush. He stepped inside, keeping a respectful distance, and said the words he had rehearsed 100 times. In his mind, "Clara, I'm not here to make excuses. I was a coward. I froze when I should have been your shield. I failed you. Nothing can justify that. I am sorry." The raw sincerity in his voice made her wall of ice tremble. He placed her Nightingale folder on the table. "I read this, and I finally understood. My mistake wasn't just my silence. It was my blindness from the very beginning. I'm sorry for not seeing you." She remained silent, her eyes searching his, looking for any sign of deceit and finding none. "And because I was blind," Adrian continued, a new excitement in his voice, "I almost missed what the rest of the world saw." And he told her about Daniel Chun's call. He didn't say, "I want to offer you a job." He said, "Daniel Chun and other investors want to bet on your vision. They want to create an independent foundation, built entirely around you. They only want one person as its CEO, you. Sterling Industries would be a partner if you'd have us. I would be your partner, not your boss. This isn't me giving you a chance, Clara. This is the world answering your call. Clara sat down, utterly stunned. She looked at Adrian, then out the window. Her own foundation? CEO? Hundreds of millions of dollars? It was too big, too surreal. Was this another one of his complicated games? But when she looked into Adrian's eyes, she didn't see calculation. She saw humility. She saw a genuine excitement, not for himself, but for her. I don't know what to say, she whispered. You don't have to say anything right now, Adrian replied, his voice softening. This is your world, your rules. I just want the honor of helping you build it. They didn't ask for an answer. They didn't beg for forgiveness. He simply placed a new future, a future where she was the undisputed center, right in front of her. Clara didn't say yes. But for the first time in days, the ice around her heart began to melt, replaced by a feeling she thought she would never feel again for this man. Hope. Their story hadn't ended in betrayal. A new, unexpected, and much brighter chapter had just begun. The next 3 months were a whirlwind of strategy meetings, personnel interviews, and late nights fueled by coffee. Clara, as the CEO of the Nightingale Fund, proved to be a natural-born leader. She was decisive, sharp, and inspiring. Adrian, as a founding partner from Sterling Industries, kept his word. He provided resources, offered advice when asked, but never interfered. He had stepped back, becoming a supporter of her vision. The shift in their professional dynamic was stunning. In boardrooms, it was Clara who stood at the whiteboard, sketching out strategy, while Adrian listened and took notes. He watched her, not just with the respect of a partner, but with a quiet pride he didn't dare name. The only bridge between their professional and private lives was Max. Clara, despite her busy schedule, never broke her promise to the little boy. A few evenings a week, she would stop by the mansion, not as Adrian's partner, but as Max's best friend. One night, Adrian stood leaning against his son's doorway, watching quietly. Clara was sitting on the bed, reading Max a story about the stars. Her voice was low and soothing. After Max fell asleep, she gently tucked him in. When she turned and saw Adrian, she just gave a small nod. "Thank you," Adrian said softly, "for not giving up on him." "I never would," Clara replied. "Max is an important part of my life." They stood there in the comfortable silence of the hallway. No longer CEO and partner, no longer employer and employee. They were just two people who loved the same child. That moment, fragile but real, was the fertile ground where trust began to grow again. The climax of their relationship came on the launch night of the Nightingale Fund. The event was held in a modern art gallery, the space filled with light, hope, and inspiring conversations. This was Clara's night. She was the star, the center of all attention. Adrian was there, but he stood in the back, mingling with the crowd. He watched her, radiant in a silver dress, speaking confidently on stage. She didn't talk about herself, but about the people the fund would help. She spoke of the power of community, of dignity and opportunity. Her words had weight, because she had lived every one of them. For a brief moment, Adrian caught the eye of Veronica and Harrison Croft in a corner of the room. They had come, perhaps to save face, but their expressions were a mixture of envy and astonishment. They were on the sidelines, watching the world celebrate the woman they had tried to destroy. When the event was over and the last guests had left, only Adrian and Clara remained in the vast, quiet space. The glittering lights reflected off the polished floor, surrounded by posters bearing the Nightingale logo, a logo she had sketched herself. "You did it," Adrian said, his voice low and emotional. Clara turned to him, a faint smile still on her lips. "No, we did it." "No." He stepped closer. "You did. I was just the lucky one who got to watch." He paused, looking deep into her eyes. "I used to build things out of steel and glass." Cold, empty, powerful things. I thought that was strength. He raised a hand, almost touching her cheek before letting it drop. But tonight, watching you on that stage, I realize you build things out of hope. You build people up. That's real strength, Clara. Her entire body stilled at his sincerity. I was once in love with a solution, he continued, his voice thick with emotion. I loved your intelligence, your usefulness to my problems. But that wasn't love. That was selfishness. He took one final step, closing the distance between them. It's different now. I don't need a solution anymore. But I need you. Clara, I love you. I love the real you. The woman who tells stories about the stars. The woman who sketches new worlds. The woman who doesn't need a single thing from me, but gives me everything. Tears began to well in Clara's eyes, but this time, they weren't tears of hurt. They were tears of release. She had seen his change in every action over the past months, but hearing these words from his heart healed the final scar. He didn't try to kiss her. He just stood there, his heart completely exposed, giving her all the power. And it was she who acted. Clara rose on her toes, brought her hands to his face, and drew him down to her. Their kiss wasn't rushed or demanding. It was slow, deep, and full of discovery. It was the meeting of two souls who had walked through a storm to find each other. It was forgiveness. It was a beginning. It was a promise that needed no words. When they parted, their foreheads still touching, Adrian whispered, "This is no longer a contract." Clara smiled through her tears. "No, this is a covenant." And this time, it was written on the heart. Their lives entered a new chapter, one with no contracts or pretenses. Their love, once acknowledged, became as natural as breathing. Adrian was no longer the cold CEO returning to an empty house. He returned to the sound of Max's laughter and the smell of cookies Clara was baking in the kitchen. Clara was no longer the outsider looking in. She was the heart of the family, filling every corner with warmth and light. They were a team, in the boardroom and in the kitchen. They strategized the national expansion of the Nightingale Fund together, but they also taught Max how to ride a bike together. They faced down skeptical corporate boards together, but they also built a treehouse in the backyard together. Adrian had learned that the greatest strength wasn't controlling everything, but having someone to share everything with. One Sunday morning, Adrian watched Clara and Max sprawled on the floor, drawing a giant treasure map. A plan began to form. In his mind, not a business plan, but a life plan. "Max," he whispered to his son later, "I have a top-secret, critical mission for you. Are you my best secret agent?" Max's eyes lit up. "Yes, Commander." "Good," Adrian smiled. "Our mission is codenamed Operation Forever." The first anniversary celebration of the Nightingale Fund was held in the very same community square where it all began. The space was now transformed into a colorful festival, with craft stalls, live music, and the smiling faces of hundreds of people whose lives had been changed. Clara, as the founder and CEO, gave a moving speech. Adrian stood in the crowd, holding Max's hand tightly, watching her with unconcealed love. When she finished, a thunderous applause echoed through the square. Then, Adrian walked onto the stage. The crowd fell silent, waiting to hear from the CEO of Sterling Industries. "Good evening," he began, his voice warm and sincere. "A year ago, at a different event, I was asked to choose between my empire and a woman. And in my shameful silence, I chose nothing." A small murmur went through the crowd. Clara looked at him, surprised. "I was wrong," Adrian continued, his eyes never leaving Clara's. "Because I didn't realize that woman was the real empire. She doesn't build with brick and mortar, but with belief. She doesn't measure success in profits, but in lives healed." He turned to the crowd. "All of you here knew her worth long before. I did. Today, I stand here not as a CEO, but as a man who was taught the most valuable lesson of all, that the brightest future isn't something you own, but someone you love. He took a deep breath. "Agent Max, it's time." Max, in a dapper little suit, marched seriously onto the stage, holding a small velvet box. He handed it to Adrian with a proud wink. Adrian got down on one knee before Clara, in front of the entire community she cherished. The whole square held its breath. "Clara," he said, his voice trembling with emotion, "you taught me how to be a better father, a better leader, and a better man. You turned my house into a home. Now, will you make my life the greatest adventure of all by becoming my wife?" Happy tears streamed down Clara's cheeks. She laughed through them, nodding over and over. "I will," she whispered. "Yes, of course I will." The square erupted in cheers and applause. Adrian slid the ring onto her finger, then stood to pull her into a tight, lingering hug. Max jumped up and down, hugging both of their legs. Mission accomplished. He yelled their wedding didn't take place in a lavish ballroom, but right at the Nightingale Hub, with strings of glittering lights and music from a local band. Their guests were their friends, colleagues, and the families from the community. Their vows weren't flowery prose, but heartfelt promises to always listen, to always respect, and to always build ladders for others together. Their life continued, a symphony of love, family, and meaningful work. The Nightingale Fund received the National Social Innovation Award. Sterling Industries, under Adrian's new leadership, became a model for corporate responsibility. One evening a few years later, after tucking Max into bed, they sat on their porch, looking up at the starry sky. The prestigious gold trophy sat on a bookshelf inside, but it couldn't shine as brightly as the look in their eyes. "It's strange to think," Clara said, resting her head on his shoulder. "It all started with an order, an unwanted party." Adrian took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "No, that wasn't the beginning. That was the prologue. Our story," he said, his voice certain, "truly began the moment I stopped trying to write it myself and started listening to you." They sat there in the quiet of an ordinary night, realizing that the greatest happiness wasn't a grand destination, but the simple journey taken together. And that was the very best chapter of their story.